Hi there, I'm your host Clive Serkin, and welcome to the Unstuck podcast, where we're on a journey to help you get control of your work environment, get yourself unstuck, and perform to your full potential. So today's episode, frankly, it's exhausting just to introduce this guy. But I'm going to try, and then I'll probably have to take a nap because I haven't met someone who's like so full on than Chris. So Chris is the founder and CEO of Trainual, and we'll talk about that in a while. But it's basically a SaaS company that helps business house their knowledge and automate their onboarding and a bunch of other things that we'll talk about. But that's just the beginning. Okay, so Chris is also the host of a podcast called Process Makes Perfect, which I'm going to take a run at for a while later on. He's the author of a book, 100 Hacks to Improve Your Business. He writes a column in Inc. magazine called The Process Playbook. And, you know, a serial entrepreneur, a father, a husband. I could keep going. So, Chris, welcome. It's great to have you on. How the hell do you do this in one day?
Well, thank you for having me. And I definitely don't do it all in one day. I just do a little bit of it every day and it adds up. I think that's the secret.
It's impressive, my friend. It's impressive. So I want to talk about being a serial entrepreneur. I want to talk about you're a type 1 diabetic, as I understand it, and diagnosed pretty early on. So I want to talk a little bit about that. And then I want to talk a lot about Trainual because there's some really interesting stuff happening there. But talk to me about, like, you're a serial entrepreneur. As far as I recall, story has it, legend has it, you started your first gig at age 14 as a video production company, if I got it correctly. And like
Yeah.
it's been all on since then. So you've never like gone the conventional route, like I didn't got a regular job. And I'm not saying one's better than the other, but talk to me about the life of a serial entrepreneur. And a lot of people who listen to this podcast are in startups, you know, whether it's pre-revenue to Series D to scaling. And I'm just curious, how did that happen? Like, what was the genesis of it, and how did it become a drug? And there's no going back, clearly.
Yeah.
So, tell me
Yes.
the story.
So the legend, I guess, is mostly true. I started my video company at 14. But the truth is I had companies like as a little kid starting at age 4 or 5. You know, I probably had a dozen business cards before I turned 10 because I would just make them, on the computer and print them out and cut them and hand them out to all my neighbors. And I had like a fanny pack and would stuff my, dollars that I'd make from cleaning people's lawn furnitures and waxing their cars and mopping their houses. And so I just, as a kid, I always wanted to be in business. It was like a fun game to me.
But from where? Like, what was was it
So
your parents?
yeah, so my dad was in the corporate world, so not an entrepreneur, but he would dress up in a suit every day and had one of those hard briefcases, and went to with like his big corporate office center had like a waterfall in the lobby, and like to me, like that is business success. And so as a kid, you can't get a job, but you can make a lemonade stand and you can cut grass and you can do these things. So to me, that was what I was going to do until someday I could get a job. I didn't see it as entrepreneurship. I saw it as like I'm just working and trying to make money. So that was when I was a kid. When I first turned 14, I was in Massachusetts, and at 14 you could have a work permit to work a certain number of 3 hours a day or something at a grocery store. So I did have one job, and it was at a grocery store when I was 14 because it was like on the day that I could apply for this thing. That's how bad I wanted to work. And so the plan was not start my own company the whole time. It was just make money and have a job. And so it's so happened to be that when I started high school, I joined this like film class. There was this other kid who had been producing a show for our town's public access station. It was like kind of an interview show where you'd interview sports teams and the guy that made the big snowman in town and just the
Yeah.
random things that would happen. And his co-host was graduating, so he needed a new co-host. He also happened to work at the supermarket where I got a job. And so I volunteered to be a co-host on this show, thinking like it'll be fun. I like technology. And what happened that was interesting is we produced the show. We came out with me as the co-host. And our town, the cable access station, had nothing else to play except for our show, the town council meeting, and that like bulletin board that would be a static slide.
Yeah.
And so our little kids show would air like 40, 50, 60 times a week. And people around town started seeing this thing. And so being, in the grocery store, the two of us, we would get people coming up to us and saying, "Oh, you're those TV kids. You're the kids on TV. Like, could you film my cousin's wedding, or could you make film the talent show at school?" And so boom, it's like an opportunity to make money. And so again, to me, that it was just opportunistic. It wasn't like some master plan at the beginning, but that was kind of how it started.
So you fast forward, and like now, let's say grown up startup right now. So in the context of say Trainual, there's a lot of startups out there, and my feeling is COVID has sort of accelerated that, and people are taking a leap. You hear the success stories, right? But there's a ton of debris on the side of the road, and it ain't easy at every turn. You don't have the revenue, you don't have the funds when you need the funds, you don't have the talent when you need the talent, you don't have the business when you need the business. Like everything's. What are some of the big ones? And I heard you in a conversation once where you go like, if you're scared of doing something, if you're scared of following your idea, don't do it. If I heard you correctly, but
Yeah.
I'm just curious. Some of the the big lessons learned is in the scars that you have.
So I would say one fallacy with starting a businesses or being a serial entrepreneur, like you said, is I think people want to juggle a lot of businesses and have their hands in a lot of things at once. And early on, my video company was growing and did really well. It grew through high school, through college. We ended up with 3 offices across the US, hundreds of camera operators, and little by little I was getting the shiny object syndrome for other things.
Yep.
And so I started trying to build this little internet company, and it was sucking all the profits out of my video company, and the little internet thing didn't work. And then, eventually I sold my video company and started a consulting firm, and in that interim period, I started this little, like, it was an idea to create a business in a box, like a retail product for kids. And that failed. And then it was like an employee benefits company that I want to create, and that failed. And so like there's a few big success stories here, but in between there's a lot of tiny failures. And I think the failures happened because I was trying to juggle too many things. I was obsessed with the idea that I could spin up a few products and a few companies and one of them will work. But the reality is I was spreading myself so thin that nothing was working. And so I think that's one of the big lessons, is just focusing and trying to do one thing at a time, because being a serial entrepreneur, I think, can't be multiple businesses at once as easily as it can be one and then another one and then another one that are successful independently.
Because you got to. I mean, for success, you got to immerse yourself. I
Yeah.
mean, I haven't seen any success story where the founders weren't all in all day, every day,
Right.
grinding it out. Because when the proverbial stuff hits the fan, you gotta roll up sleeves and dig in.
Right.
Yeah.
And like, if anybody listening has ever watched Shark Tank or anything, one of the questions they ask is like, are you full time? Are you all in this business? And the people that they're like, no, I have a side job, or I've got this other thing, it's an instant red flag, because you've got to be all in on the business.
So I'm sort of switching gears because being all in and running at the pace that you clearly run at, and having diabetes. So you were diagnosed early in young age,
Yeah.
right?
8 years old.
8 years old. Okay, and type 1.
Yes.
So how's that have impacted you positively and or negatively? Like, what's it like living with that? Because I'm involved in a company that we were talking about before we went live, where
Hmm.
we provide an energy supplement that's born out of a kid having a congenital, essentially diabetes condition, and
Yeah.
it's tough.
Yeah. So, initially when I was first diagnosed, I thought, why me? Why did this happen to me? Like, this is unfair. I don't want to deal with this. And there was that kind of period of going through, life's never going to be the same again. My mom was hugely impactful for me, and, told me that, if I couldn't have handled this, I wouldn't have got it. And so for whatever you believe, that was the mindset shift that she gave me when I was just a little kid. And I really think that that diabetes, the silver lining of diabetes, looking back, it gave me so much independence where other kids, didn't have the ability to leave class and walk to the nurse's office without a hall pass. I did. Where other kids, didn't really like have a say in what was for dinner or what was, I did, because I was meal planning
Right.
and carb counting, where I built these analytical skills because I was always counting carbs or measuring doses of insulin. I built like the accountability of having to record all my blood sugars and have quarterly meetings with an endocrinologist, which in retrospect was like my first board meetings,
Yeah.
like quarterly meetings with the doctor that I got to show my work. I've been doing this for decades. Um, there are a lot of lessons thinking strategically. If I'm going to go play sports with the friends, I can't just go without thinking ahead. I've got to plan what snacks I need to bring with me and what levels I need to adjust in my insulin pump and those sort of things. So it's easy to connect the dots now, but I think it had such a benefit to shaping me as a leader. So I'm thankful for having the experience. And that said, now I want to cure it. So I think, I'm also very goal oriented, and part of having diabetes through a period of a few decades when there was so much technological advancement, it went from, the syringes and having to give myself shots 8 times a day and whatever, to now, a pump that basically connects to a continuous glucose monitor and does its own thing. And I don't even really have to pay attention to it. 10 years from now, though, I think be therapies that control it almost more automatically to the point of a close to a cure. And that experience of watching technology transform the disease has given me I guess the recipe for using technology to transform other things.
Right.
Shows you, you get addicted to progress.
No doubt. And I think there's an interesting inflection point happening because, as I said, my experience at UCAN is a lot of the science and physiology that impacts diabetes is now fundamental to athletes' energy dosing
Hmm.
and managing glucose levels and insulin levels as a way to extend energy, to get out of the insulin spikes, to get into ketosis and burning fat. So,
Yeah.
if you look at some of the major pharma companies, they're now putting their technology into um, both supplements and devices for athletes. And I think with those two worlds coming together, I think there's going to be a real acceleration in terms of the kind of innovation you see in dealing with diabetes.
Absolutely. And because of that consumer spin on it, a mass market thing that affects all athletes, the science that's backing those kind of innovations, it sometimes moves faster than the stuff that goes through clinical trials for a
Yep,
niche population, and so to have that real large market appeal, I think it's only going to compound the work that's being done for diabetes.
absolutely. So let's go back to one of your side hustles, which is process makes perfect. And these
Yeah.
things are obviously connected because Trainual is a big part of that. But I want to talk about process makes perfect and the conceit of it and what you're trying to accomplish. But I'm going to take a run at least on the surface of it, because part of Unstuck and the thinking of Unstuck is having grown up in large companies, Fortune 500 blue chip companies, and having worked for 17 years at agencies and getting exposure to, 100 plus large corporations. The one thing that I saw and became dismayed by is that as companies grow, they instill process.
Hmm.
um, Process is a necessary, I'd say maybe evil, in order to avoid anarchy. And as you get bigger as a company, it's truly crucial to have process and discipline and policies and all of those things. But without exception, my experience has been that it takes on a life of its own, and process becomes like a separate industry, and it now turns from being something that's designed to enable to something that inhibits. And if I had a dollar for every time someone would say to me, I'm losing the will to live because I spend most of my day managing the beast, like managing process, like I work for the process. So
Yeah.
I'm curious. I can only assume that that's the conceit of process makes perfect, which is just enough process. But I don't want to put words in your mouth. Talk about.
No, no, well said. It's funny. One of our core values at Trainual is no red tape. And we always kind of joke that, process introduces a little bit of red tape. And so it's kind of like 10% red tape, like just enough that it's not constraining people, but it's helping make things consistent. So the idea with process makes perfect, it was just a take on, practice makes perfect. But in pursuit of perfection inside a business, you are trying to create consistent results, consistent outputs, consistent experiences. And it's not to say that you wouldn't continually innovate what the consistent experience should be. I think everybody should always be innovating and creating new best practices and not getting stuck in, oh, this is the way we always did it. So process should not be a fallback for this is the way we always did it. But process should be at every step in your company's innovation a way to kind of put some bricks down and say, this is the new current best way to do things. Let's all get aligned around this way to do it. So the podcast actually was recently rebranded as Organized Chaos, which is the name of my consulting firm that I had before Trainual. And so it was kind of a fun rebrand because, again, some people think of process and may have negative connotation, whereas organizing chaos, that's what we're all trying to do. And process is one of the tools to help organize the chaos of every growing business. So the name has changed, but the content is still the same, which is how do you deal with all the chaos in your business? How do you introduce some structure just enough to get to consistent results?
Right. Because, I mean, ultimately, process well designed and well executed should reduce friction. And the minute there's process friction, it's sort of a red flag, at least in my view, it's a red flag to say that your process isn't designed well or isn't getting executed well, or you have too much process and process
Yes,
become the tail that's wagging the dog versus the
right.
other way around.
Exactly. Yeah. And to your point about, people feel like they spend their whole day managing the beast or whatever. If you're having to do that and navigating all the process and checking all the boxes, then it probably needs some refinement, some simplification. And that's not what we want to spend our time doing.
No doubt. But it's in because I'm the executive chairman of Screen Dragon that sponsors this podcast, and Screen Dragon is essentially a collaboration platform. It's a SaaS
Hmm.
platform, and I always ask um, our clients or prospective clients, just off the top of your head, like pick a day. How much of your day did you spend on accomplishing the outcome that you believe you are there to do, or you're there to do? Hopefully, they're the same thing. And how much of your time did you spend on managing the beast? Like stuff designed that doesn't drive the outcome. And it's depressing to hear how much time is spent on process and organization and crap like that. And my thing is like, you got a problem. Like, your technology should be invisible. Your technology should be removing work
Yeah.
through automation, and your processes should be enabling and reducing friction. And if they're
Right.
not, then that's a flag for you to sort of sit down and go, what should we do? Now, on the flip side, there's the re-industry, right? Re-engineering, restructuring, reorganizing. And that's like a multi-billion-dollar industry that, I'd be game for, except the tragedy is 3 years later, most of those companies are back doing another re-engineering, which suggests that they either didn't get to root cause or they just sort of the process took on a life of its own. Do you see that? Are we looking at the same world, or I'm in a dark place?
I I think companies are always re-engineering. I mean that the So sometimes things get so messy that you need to, to think of it like a messy closet, and you just need to take everything out and reorganize it every once in a while. And it's I think for most people, unless there's some crazy organized people out there that their closets are always perfect, for most people, like, the laundry builds up, or like things get cluttered, or it's the stuff you don't wear anymore, and all of us need to do that kind of cleaning and organize it. And so I think re-engineering is natural, and that change management of rebuilding processes or recreating structures or reassigning responsibilities or rewriting roles. I mean, I think that's part of business's growth, and it's definitely part of what we're building into our product.
I buy that, and but what you talked about is sort of a constant small iterations of optimization versus, like, to continue analogy, tearing down the house and rebuilding a closet because your closet's disorganized. You know what I'm saying? It's like,
Oh yeah, yeah.
it's like,
That's overkill.
and a lot of times it is, but I think it's like, if you just take a step back and think it through, like, what exactly we're trying to fix before you start, you know, taking a sledgehammer to this. But um,
Yeah.
you see a lot of this in through Trainual. So let's talk about Trainual. Um,
Sure.
in and I'll start with just a bit of an anecdote. So I met you because a young guy that I've known for a long, 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 long time, since he was born, um, took a job at your company, and he called me and he was like, "This is the greatest place on earth." Okay. And then he called me and said, "Okay, the most bizarre thing happened to me, which confirms my bias that this is the greatest place on earth," which is, he got a letter or an email from you or someone in the company that essentially says, "You've been here 2 weeks." You'll correct the facts in a second, but this is the gist of it. "You've been here for 2 weeks. Um, if you wish to leave, here's $5,000. You can leave, no questions asked. But if you want to stay, which we hope you do, write us a note and tell us why you want to stay." And I know now, when I looked at it, it's like, you're not the first guys to do something like this. I know Zappos did this way
Yep.
back when, but I don't think they offered 5 grand. But I was just like, back on I was like, this is genius. And he sat down and he wrote a note and he said, it just reaffirmed why I fell in love with this company and where I see myself going in the company. So did I get all of the facts right? Talk about it, because that's not the only madness in Trainio.
You got it. No, you got it. And I think it's probably important to call out that, if Chris thinks this is the best place on earth, he before this worked at Disney World. So
Yeah,
I think that is the highest flattery he could possibly bestow on us. Uh, yeah, that's no, you got it. So we have this policy, which, like you said, I read "Delivering Happiness" by the late Tony Hsieh,
yep.
years and years ago when it first came out. They had a policy where, after week one in their call centers, they offered $1,000 for someone to leave. And I always thought it was genius. So I stored it in my mind. And when the pandemic first started in early 2020, we had an engineer that joined the company, and 5 days in, he sent me a note and he said, after being here a few days, I think that I should have taken the other offer that I had, because just realizing what the squad, how our squads operate, and what my role is on the team, I think I should be in more of a leadership role, and that's what I was being offered at the other company, and that's what I'm looking for. And so we said, great, no hard feelings, like that, like, thank you for telling us. But the internal conversation started to become, how many of those are we missing? Like, how many people get here, dip their toe in, start to do the job, and realize that this is not going to be where I am long
Yeah.
term. And then we're surprised 6 months, 9 months later when they leave. Once we've invested a lot more in that person and put responsibilities on their plate. And not to mention, it's once our candidate pool has gone cold, and now we've got to start the process all over again. And so it seemed like this great idea that, why don't we just give people the chance to opt in or opt out once they've been through the bulk of the company training. So we started doing this in May of 2020. And since then, we've made the offer to dozens and dozens of people that we've hired. And unfortunately, none have taken it so far. So it's our hiring team is doing an amazing job.
But there's a at the heart of it is you're enabling a transparent, no consequence or no negative consequence for either party conversation,
Yeah.
which is so important because I have the privilege of sort of like advising a lot of people call me for counsel and what do you think, and that in a lot at the heart of most of the questions I get asked or the dilemmas that get presented to me is a fear of having an open and honest conversation.
Hmm.
And I know you have a point of view on compensation where I think open and honest conversations is at the heart of it. So, talk to me about what you think about compensation because a lot of companies fall into this trap of there's a annual raise or there's an every 18-month raise and there's a standard bonus, and it's not really a raise, and it's a sort of an expectation, and
Yeah.
it takes the whole sort of the essence of what it's supposed to do out of it. So I'd love to hear your philosophy and comp, because I think there's a dot connect in between these two.
Yeah, I have so many philosophies on comp. So
You got
where
plenty
do we
of
want to start? I think one more point I want to make as we bridge this gap into comp is, like you said, giving someone a no consequence way out. I'm sure a lot of people listening have been on a call or in a meeting that is running over the expected time. And what I love is when someone says at the top of the hour, we only budgeted 30 minutes for this or 60 minutes. If anybody has to leave, feel free, and the rest of us can continue on. Because then what happens after that is a bunch of people say, "Oh yeah, I have another meeting. I have another meeting," and they leave the room. And that's what we're trying to do with the hiring process at the very beginning, to say, like, if anybody needs to leave, like, here's your way out, no hard feelings, and here's some money to while you find your next job. I think it's just a humane thing to do. So bridging that into comp, one of our first decisions we made around comp was first that we wanted to have a ton of detail, market data, whatever we could find, and present people with salaries upfront when we're interviewing them, to say, here's, we don't want to get to the end of the process, we don't want to waste your time, here is the salary that we think is the market salary for this position. Like, is that going to work? All right, let's continue the interview. So we're very upfront with comp because we don't want to get to the end of a process, really like someone, and then it turn into this used car negotiation kind of thing. And so we're very upfront about comp. And same with when we hire people, we stick to our guns. We don't negotiate late in the process, because really we should have been clear about what we were looking for and what value it was going to bring to the business and what we would pay for that. So that's the first piece in the hiring process. In terms of when we do raises, people can receive a promotion and an increase for a promotion at any time. That because things happen, someone leaves, we need a new role, we invent a new role, somebody takes it on, and so you can get an increase, a promotion at any time. Then twice a year, we open up these performance review cycles where we are always reviewing people's performance, because the worst thing we want is to not consider someone for a raise until they're overdue for one. And so we try to consider that as frequently, and make sure that we're giving people performance improvements as they take on more responsibility, increase their capacity, increase their efficiency, increase their autonomy. Like, those are all the reasons that you get paid more in a business, because you're more valuable to the business. And so we like giving people raises, and giving them an aggressive trajectory on comp, because high people that are really high slope and doing things, we want to reward that. So I'm sure a lot of other philosophies on comp, but I'm curious if there's something you saw that you want to dig into.
Well, the that's exactly it. But the notion that comp is about um, what you do and the impact you have, as opposed to some sort of expectation that's going to happen irrespective. So there's a
Oh
clear
yeah.
you do, you get. And it's
Yeah. I
also a
think,
two-way street. And there's no, it's an unabashed two-way street where both parties benefit.
yeah, I think one of the articles I wrote about this was, It's not like in Monopoly where you get a raise for pass and go. Like a lot of companies just think about their increases on an annual cycle or something like that. And I think that's the wrong way to do it, because so much can change. If someone starts providing immense value to the company, or if someone's department grows and they went from one direct report to 7 direct reports, should you wait 12 months to give them an increase for that new work that they're doing? Or are you shortchanging them by waiting on that cycle? So I think it's a constant thing you're evaluating.
I find it refreshing, and it takes out the monotony and the expectation, and it creates goodwill because the comp is lined up to the effort when the effort happens, as opposed to 6 or 8 or 9 months later. Either it's like, yeah, I got it because I was expecting it, or I've been killing myself for the last 9 months, and you finally show up. And over time, that creates a cultural sort of leak,
Right.
which is so crucial, which can be so detrimental to a company,
Right.
in my view. So, Trainual, okay. I don't know how many, like, I'm not well versed in the category you're in, but I don't know a lot of companies out there that are doing what you're doing, in terms of turning best practice into SOP, to onboarding, to policies. Talk a little bit about what you do and why it's
Yeah.
so crucial.
Yeah, so in this space, this training, onboarding, standard operation procedure type space, we see it as a spectrum where at the very bottom of the space, writing down anything is great. If you've got a free Google Doc or Word doc or something, and you've put pen to paper and said, here is a how we do things, or here is our documented core values, anything like that is a great start for a small business. On the top end of the spectrum, large enterprise companies, probably some you've been involved with, have compliance and more bureaucracy type training requirements, and they're training external knowledge to up level their people. But in between a company that just writes things down on a Google Doc and a company that has layers and layers and layers of management, there is so much internal knowledge about who is our business, what makes us unique, who is our target customer, what are our values, what is our mission and vision, what are our departments and roles and responsibilities, what do we expect of each person, and what are the best practices to get the results we want. All of that stuff can live in people's heads, or it can start to slowly get unearthed and shared across the team for alignment. And so what we're trying to do with Trainual, which initially was just training manual slammed together, is create this online simple platform where you can slowly start to write down and record the things, the how-tos in your business. You can create alignment with your team. You can onboard your new people, get them totally up to speed on what you're all about, and then you can update everybody as things change in the business. And so it's just a central place where all that happens.
And it's a SaaS platform.
Yeah.
Got it. Yeah, I mean, I've had all kinds of experiences you can imagine, from, you know, 20 binders piled on a desk that had, that hadn't
Yeah.
been updated or had been updated, to nothing at all and everything in between.
Yeah.
Um, and it's just a function of the individual as opposed to systemic in the company. And this makes it more systemic and also easier to manage, I would imagine.
Oh yeah. I mean, and you know where to go for the questions. First it creates a training experience because a new person starting with the company can learn in a really approachable order what they need to know about the business, about the people in the business, about the norms and the rules in the company, and then about their job and what they're being expected to do. It helps you create this experience of getting up to speed. And then that last part I mentioned is that things change in a business all the time. You create new best practices, you collaborate on these things. So when you've got a question of who to go to for something, or how do I do something, how do I fill in for someone, you've got a central place to go find it.
Cool. Well, we're run out of time, which always happens when you're talking to someone super interesting. But I would say to everyone, check out Chris's podcast, which was Practice Made Perfect, which is now Organizing Chaos. Is that it?
Yes.
Yeah,
Organized chaos.
Organized Chaos. Read his book, which is 100 Hacks to Improve Your Business. There it is. The Business
And
Playbook.
actually, this is a new one. So 100 Hacks was my first book. This is the Business Playbook, which was a 7 times Amazon bestseller. So
I
the
missed that
Business
one.
Playbook.
The Business
What was
Playbook.
that?
Because I read the 100 Hacks to Improve Your Business. Gee, I'm behind the curve here. All
Oh
right,
man, yeah.
I'll catch up.
Check out the businessplaybook.com.
And his column on Inc. magazine, the Process Playbook column. Chris, absolute joy having you. Love talking. We're going to talk more, my friend. But I appreciate you making time to talk to us.
Thanks for having me. This is great.
This podcast was brought to you by Screen Dragon. We break down barriers, make work flow, and unlock talent. Visit screendragon.com to see our software in action.